You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, it's nice to be back with you all again. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And while this is always going to put the emphasis on the AT, I noticed that the schedule for last week, this week, and even next week tells us stories beyond the AT. Our guest today, Charlie Janssen, actually first did the AT in 2012, but even then he started thinking about a possible calendar year Triple Crown. Can you imagine? In 2022, 10 years after his AT hike, he became the 13th person to complete a calendar year Triple Crown, and today he shares his story with us. Charlie will be on in a moment. And along with Leah Harmon last week, Charlie this week, and I'm going to be bringing on somebody next week who's taken 5 years to complete a truly massive hike. Google Mel Vogel, and you'll see what I mean. Also today, we have updates from two of our Mighty Blue class of 23, one of whom is starting this very morning on Thursday, March the 2nd, while the other sets out next week. As you can imagine, they are very excited. And for those starters, and for the rest of you, Dr. Lynn is back today to tell us all about blisters. Then George Stefanos' boots suffer the fate of many a boot in Pennsylvania. It was ever thus. So we've got another packed show, so let's start by meeting Charlie Janssen, or Kansas Express. Our guest today is one of very few people to have successfully completed a calendar year Triple Crown. This is Charlie Janssen, or the Kansas Express. Hey, Charlie, thanks for coming on the show to share your story.
Thanks for having me.
Well, good to have you on the show because you reached out and said that you've just done this amazing thing. But it's not actually the first time you've done a thru-hike. You actually did a thru-hike, a Sobo thru-hike in 2012. Tell us what it was that got you out there in the first place.
There's a lot of different reasons, but one of the main reasons, though, is that it was kind of a college graduation gift to myself. Right. So it's something that I had kind of had in my head since 2009-ish. Mm-hmm. And then, but I was like, it was just one of those things that I had kind of like mentally tabled, and something that, I was just like, maybe I'll do it someday. If I do, cool. If not, it's fine. And then it's something that I really started fixating on in March of 2012, about 2 months from graduation. And then in July, I finally took off. I chose to go start southbound that late because I was in a friend of mine's wedding party in Chicago.
Oh, right. So you went straight for the wedding to Qatar, did you?
Yeah, I did. I took a 46-hour Greyhound from Downers Grove, Illinois to Millinocket, Maine.
You can do that when you're young, though, can't you? You can't do it when you're a lot older, let me tell you.
By the time I actually got to Millinocket, I kind of thought to myself, that was enough adventure just in the Greyhound ride itself that I was like, wow, man, if there's more adventure than this, I don't know if I'm cut out for it.
And there certainly was in your future. So how did you prepare for it? Because there was no real YouTube rabbit hole to go down in those days, was there? I know YouTube existed, but there wasn't the plethora of YouTube videos on hiking. So what did you do to work out what you needed, or had you been a regular hiker for some time?
So the only time I've been like camping and been like an outdoors guy my entire life, ever since I can remember. But in terms of like textbook backpacking, I had actually only done for about 8 days in Philmont Scout Ranch in Cimarron, New Mexico when I was 15. And then I hadn't done even a single night of like true backpacking until my first day on the Appalachian Trail in 2012. So In terms of no YouTube rabbit hole to go down to, I really approached it fairly arrogantly. I'm like, well, Eagle Scout.
That'll soon find you out, won't it?
Right. The trail sorted me out real quick. But I was like, well, I'm an Eagle Scout and I'm a collegiate athlete. All you're doing is walking. How hard can it be? Mm-hmm. And I started out with a 52-pound pack, no poles.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So hang on, you did your approach trail up Katahdin with a 52-pound pack. How did that feel?
No, I did because I was going southbound at the Katahdin Stream Ranger Station. You can get just a day pack to go up and down. So I went up and down pretty quickly. There were no views at the top. It was completely socked in by fog. And then I collected my super heavy pack at Katahdin Stream's Ranger Station. And then on day one, that was July 24th, 2012, I made it to the other side of Able Bridge.
Right. Wow. Good for you then. So how did that feel? What were those first few days like? Because this is an adventure which takes us all differently. We all approach it differently, I guess, but there's a certain commonality of interest. Obviously, we all want to get to the end. How did you find those first few days quite humbling, or did they take you by surprise? Did you get rid of gear and all that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. I found out real quick what I needed to get rid of. It was pretty brutal. So, I did make it through the 100-mile wilderness in 4 days.
Wow!
But by the time I got to Monson, I was pretty spiritually and physically broken. I was sore. Yeah.
Why didn't you quit then, Charlie? Then, or are you not a quitting type generally?
Yeah, I'm not a quitting type generally. It's kind of like kind of the old samurai credo of death before dishonor kind of thing. And so I talked a big game to all my friends that I was going to be doing this. And my goal, I actually set up a scholarship fund page for the Appalachian Leadership and Education Foundation. So when my goal was to pledge, was to raise at least $2,184.30, which was in 2012 was 2,184.3 miles over my over the entirety of the journey, and my goal is to do it in 100 days or less.
Wow! So you were ambitious. For somebody who hadn't done this, you were really ambitious. And, I'm going to talk about your other ambitions in a minute. But before we actually get onto that, we'll do that now. Actually, because it was on this hike, this Sobo hike, your first proper backpacking long distance trip, that you started to think about the possibility of a calendar year Triple Crown even then. Now, that is arrogant, by the way. Tell us, how do you go from being a newbie on the trail to this incredibly lofty ambition, which, by the way, we've got to tell everybody, spoiler alert, he did it last year. So, talk us through that. How did that thought process go?
I actually thought about it as I was descending Katahdin.
Oh my God!
on my first day.
Of course.
It wasn't something that I just contemplated the feasibility of it. I didn't think I could necessarily do it. I didn't even think, I didn't even really seriously contemplate if I even wanted to do it. I just was curious about it because I had just recently figured out that beyond the Appalachian Trail, there was the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. So those were even newer concepts. So I knew about the Appalachian Trail since I was in high school. But growing up in suburban Kansas City, it's really not trails like that aren't really at your disposal. I grew up in a pretty active family. I had a lot of pretty fortunate opportunities to travel all around the world. But nice. In terms of backpacking, though, I had never really nobody in the family or nobody's really introduced that to me, and I feel like that's pretty true of most people that go do a thru hike. It's something that they kind of get in their mind and experience it for themselves. And they might be inspired. I feel like they're more inspired by osmosis than by a particular person to go out and do it.
I think you're right. But I suppose I'm wondering Was it the adventure that appealed to you, or was it just yet another challenge you felt you needed to challenge yourself when you started thinking on this very long through hike? Whichever way you look at it, 2,000 miles is a darn long way anyway. So you still had 2,183.1 miles to go when you started thinking about it on just your first hike. Was that something that you thought was a realistic thing, or were you just kind of just throwing it out into the universe and thinking, see if this sticks?
Well, when I first started contemplating it, and I remember the day actually that I decided to do it, and it was actually I have a fairly like kind of perfectionist OCD, almost like obsessive personality to some degree, and so I had just experienced a pretpretty crushing breakup, and so I'm like, I need to fixate
That'll
on
always
something
do it.
else.
That'll always do it.
Yeah, I'm like, I need to fixate on something else, or else this is gonna destroy me. And so like I just really threw myself into planning this. So this is when I was student teaching in 2012, and but when I mentally commit to something, I really want to see it all the way through.
Well, you didn't do it in 100 days. You did it in, I think it was 120 days, your SOBO. But tell us about, which is even more remarkable, the 17 days you spent off the trail, because you end up in ICU, didn't you?
Yeah. So it was 103 days. It was 103 hiking days, including 3 regular zeros. But I was off trail for 17 days I actually developed, it was actually a combination of things. I had a really abnormal autoimmune reaction to norovirus that I got on trail.
Wow.
I went into anaphylaxis, and I developed myopericarditis from a leg infection that went from cellulitis to septic. So all 3 of those things kind of marinated together in this kind of perfect storm. And so by the time I got to Bowles Bridge in Connecticut, right on the Connecticut-New York state line, that was after my, it was on August 31st. So I think I had been on trail for like 34 days or something.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, I had this, it got to the point where I couldn't really walk anymore. And so I thought I had developed like a stress fracture, or I broke a leg in some capacity. And it really was this really, really terrible infection. And so by the time I actually got to the hospital, I was having heart palpitations, and I actually developed a cardiac arrhythmia. And so myopericarditis is when your pericardium, which is the fluid-filled sac around your heart, basically swelled, and was basically constricting the function of like the rhythmic beating, I don't know. I'm not a cardiologist.
Okay. So you had an issue with your heart. You had sepsis as well. That doesn't really speak to getting back on trail in 17 days. So there must have been a decision made that your doctors must have said to you, you need rest for about 3 months. So, or what happened then?
Yeah. So I spent 5 days in a cardiac ICU in the Danbury, Connecticut hospital. And in the following 12 days, I had multiple electrocardiograms and stress tests. And my mom ended up flying out, and she was like, "All right, you're done. You need to be done with this." And I was like, "Well, things just got personal. So I'm definitely going to go back. So you have 2 choices. You can either take me back, or I'm only 26 miles from the trail. That's light work. I'll just walk back to the trail if you don't take me back." So like that's fine. And so the cardiologist said, after 17 days, so my T waves had completely inverted, like on a heart monitor. So I still had a slightly abnormal heart rhythm at that point. So he's like, you can go back, but you have to cut your mileage by 1/3 by 2/3. So doing a third of the mileage as I was doing before. Yeah. And so at that point, I think I was like averaging like low, like right at 20 miles or so. And I'm like, man, that's reducing it down to 7 miles a day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm gonna be doing this so deep into winter. But I was like, well, you've pushed your luck enough, because everything started to go downhill from, I was feeling bad from Gorham, New Hampshire, all the way to Bulls Bridge, Connecticut.
Wow. So really, you finding out you had your cellulitis. I got cellulitis, by the way, in my 2014 hike from a bite from a hiker's dog, which is why I've always been a bit scared of dogs, to be honest with you. And so you had cellulitis, so you must have known something was wrong with your leg. You thought it was a fracture of some sort, yeah. And then you not only got over that, but because I'm relating what I happened to me last year as well. When I was going to go climb Mount Whitney last year, 2 months before I was meant to summit Mount Whitney, I had 180 heartbeats per minute on my heart, and I went to spend the night in hospital. And I asked the doctor afterwards, "Is there a cardiac reason I shouldn't be doing this?" So you must have asked a similar question. Is there a reason I shouldn't be doing it? He said, you can go back, but you got to cut your mileage back. I'm guessing you didn't cut your mileage back. Is that right?
I did for
the first 6 miles.
I did for all of New York and the first day of New Jersey. So,
oh, right.
Yeah. So it took, but New York's 90 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yes, wow.
It took me, it took me a week to get through New York, but I was done hiking at like 10 a.m. And I just
hang on. So what is your style of hiking like normally? Are you normally up at the crack of dawn and walk all day, or are you just really fast?
I'm never the earliest hiker for sure. My normal start time is between 7 and 8 a.m. And then I tend to hike fast, take a few breaks, and then but I'm no stranger to going fairly deep into the night if I need to.
Right. So you put in the hours. I think putting in the hours was the thing that really did it for me. It was tough for me to do that. I never did hike in the night until I did this challenge to Whitney last year. And so you did other hikes in the interim before you did your calendar year Triple Crown, which is obviously what we want to talk about now. We were thinking of having your wife on the show to ask her this question, because you're now 35, you're married, you had a job, and you quit your job, although you tried to get a sabbatical. So talk us through what happened, firstly, in terms of getting the time off work, and then we'll talk about, we'll take the wife side of things in a minute.
Yeah. So the school district was actually, initially was actually very accommodating. They were thinking initially, though, that because I said I was going to be gone a year, that it would be spanning one full academic year. But as you know, with the calendar year Triple Crown, you really have to abide by kind of the rules of the seasons. So to be absent for just an academic year doesn't really match with the timeline of doing a calendar year Triple Crown. So the rules,
not that there are, well, maybe there are rules. I don't even know this, but so a calendar year Triple Crown rather means you have to do it in 2022 or 2023. You couldn't do from, say, February the 1st, 2022 to February the 1st, 2023?
Right. It's within, like, you need to be done by December 31st.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you had a word with them, and to be honest with you, that was pretty good of them to offer you a school year off, wasn't it? So that's a decision you then have to make. So This brings in your wife, I suspect, because I presume you did have a conversation with her about it. Tell us about how she reacted to you wanting first to go on this trip, be away from her for a year virtually, and second, what she thought about you quitting your job.
So strangely enough, this actually came about. This topic came about on her first date.
Oh, you sweet talker.
Yeah. In April of 2015, and we kind of had we had talked about it just kind of like informally for 3 or 4 years, and then we just kind of tabled it. And living out in a resort community in Colorado, the real estate's really hard. So we actually put a bid on a house that we didn't get. And things got even more difficult. So we were a little bit at an impasse. So obviously, if we had done the whole real estate thing, then I wouldn't have gone on this hike. So we had tabled this conversation, and after, I guess one of the big catalysts to this was in 2019, 2 weeks before we got married, I was actually in the Leadville 100.
Which is what? Sorry, I don't even know what it is.
It's a 100-mile foot race in Leadville, Colorado, and the whole race is above 10,000 feet.
Oh, God.
And
yeah, okay.
And I was doing really well for the first 50 miles, doing okay through the first 76, and then I actually at mile 46 I had partially torn my iliopsoas, which is like my groin, and it was just really, really excruciating pain. So when you're out there, trying to run like under 24 hours, that put a really big damper on those plans. And at mile 87.8, they medically pulled me from the race, and it was just pretty crushing. And so I had really wanted to do a calendar year Triple Crown, but then after that kind of like crushing defeat, I really wanted to do it.
But you do need your other half's buy-in to this, don't? Well, I presume you do, because you're still with her. So
right,
yeah, because this is not an easy thing to do. Just one hike, is it? It's a heck of a long way and a heck of a big commitment, not only on your part but on her part as well.
Right. So since actually for the majority of our relationship, she's been a traveling nurse. So we're used to having a distance relationship, and if it was anybody else, it would not have worked. With her, though, I don't want to say it's ideal, but it's something that has worked pretty well for what it is for, let's see, eight years now. Because we didn't live together until we got married, and when we got married, we were living together for about a year, and then she took off to travel nurse again because the pay in California was really, really good. And so I mean, it's always been for like financial reasons, but we're used to time apart. And it's not easy, but it's something
probably helps. Yeah, that probably helps you.
It's something that we're accustomed to. So really, like the whole like one premise of our relationship, and always has been like gaps of time actually not being together. So I feel like that was actually a pretty helpful component to being able to both of us mentally metabolize this.
Yeah, I'm sure it does as well. And how do you as a person, how do you actually prepare for a trip like this? Is there a general agreement amongst you calendar year Triple Crowners what the best way to go is? Is it this one first, this one second, to sure take 3 months here, 4 months here? Or how do you cobble together your hike?
So actually, I tried to read about as much as I could about it. And so for 7 years, I like loosely read about how it could be done. But as of 2012, only 3 people had done it. So there's just not a whole lot of information floating around. So what I did is I tried to basically figure out every possible permutation of like the mileage, what I would start, weather window, snowpack, all of those things.
Sure.
And the reason that I settled on 2022 is because I knew it was going to be a La Nina year. So what that meant is the atmospheric river and the jet stream would actually be a lot further north of the Sierra. So that what was going to be predicted, including in farmers' almanacs, is that the jet stream was actually going to go way north of the Sierra. And so I knew it was going to be a lighter snow year. And indeed, it was.
That's a useful bit of information to know, because this year they've had the biggest up for years, haven't they?
Yeah. So right now I'm in Chico, California, and we're at the base of the Sierras, and it's crazy, crazy, crazy snowpack. It's actually melting off at a record rate, but it's December and January were crazy.
So what is the best way to go? Well, we're going to talk about your hike in a second, but do you keep, because I know you weren't the only person doing a calendar year Triple Crown last year. How many of you were there doing it last year?
There were 12 total that started.
Right.
4 of us were able to successful do it.
Right. And do you keep in touch with the others while you're out there?
I do. I actually met 2 of the guys that successfully completed it, and then a guy, tank top, who got to Lava Lake Lodge, which is like outside of Du Bois, Wyoming, before calling it good for the year. I hiked with him on and off for about 500 miles. So
wow.
He wasn't able to finish, but I hiked with him for a while. He was a calendar Triple Crown guy. So I met him at High Point State Park, New Jersey on the AT. We both did the entire PCT, and then I caught up with him in Anaconda, Montana on the CDT.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, like 4,000 plus miles later.
It's incredible, isn't it, really? And it's such an elite small group of people. Are you supportive or are you competitive with them?
Oh, because it's such a small fraternity.
Because you're kick-ass guys, there's no question about it. When you see another kick-ass guy there, you want to do something, don't you?
Oh yeah, no, you bond. Exactly. You bond pretty quickly. So I ran into a guy named Boomerang. He's a German guy that was able to do it this year, or last year, 2022, and then Professor, who did it as well. I was able to hike with him for about 2 days in the winds of Wyoming as well. Right.
But let's get to it. Let's get to the hike itself. How did you pick the day to start? Because I suppose if you're going to do, I know you started at Springer, didn't you?
Right.
And you started February. I presume that's because you can't get too far north because it's pretty crappy until about July in the north. Is that right?
Right. I actually chose the day because I wanted a little bit of a how do I say this? Like a life reboot, and right. I chose February 3rd because that was my 34th birthday.
Okay.
And cool. Yeah, and so
waited 32. You waited 32 days, 34 days, by the way.
Right. So I chose February 3rd because I was turning 34, and I thought that starting on January 1st was going to be too cold and too unnecessary at the pace that I thought I could hike the Appalachian Trail.
Sure.
This time around. So I listened to the Impossible Odds podcast with Sammy Potter and Jackson Perrell, the 2 Stanford guys that were able to do it last year. They took a year away from Stanford and did a calendar Triple Crown, and they started on January 1st, and they were just being harangued by snow, and they stepped off in a little outside of Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania, before transitioning to the CDT and then the PCT, and they jumped around quite a bit. They were able to successfully do it. But I was like, I don't think that, starting, January, I think that with the weather window, I'm like, I think that I can do the 18 about 90 days. And I don't know if I can do it all the way through in one swing, but I think if I start too early, I'm just going to be suffering unnecessarily. So that's why I chose to start a little bit later.
So you started 3rd of February. You said, and I've got some notes here, and maybe I read it wrong. You took 71 days to get to Kinsman Notch, is that right?
Yeah, New Hampshire.
Right. And because the funny thing about any hiking, I think, any backpacking trip, long trip, a lot of it's a luck thing as well. And the luck is not only you could break your ankle going through Pennsylvania, for example, on the rocks and so on, but you could also, the weather just may not cooperate. It might not be as you want, and that could knock you off. How was your journey? That first part of it, those first 71 days to Kinsman Notch, was that going the way you wanted it to go?
More or less, yeah. Actually, the 3 roughest days that I experienced, maybe the entire year, were the first 3 days of the trail.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So actually the first 36 hours, that I started from Springer, it rained 6.5 inches, and it was about
Nice.
39, 40 degrees. So there was no snow. So there was no like ice to like deal with or snow to negotiate with. But, Gore-Tex actually isn't waterproof for those of you that think it is. When it rains hard enough, it will permeate, through all your layers into your skin. So my first, I was 25 hours in, and I was borderline hypothermic. So
my gosh.
I actually had to stop at Neil's at mountain crossings at Neil Gap, and for 4 hours had to dry out all my stuff and get warm.
Oh my God.
So that was that was the morning of day 2, and I'm like, oh my God, this is not a good start.
But you got to Kinsman, which is great, and then you hit bad weather there. So. And then you went back home to Kansas, I believe, to switch out your gear.
Yeah.
Had you found out your gear and really worked it through, so you knew what you needed to really take more weight off, or was it just get different gear?
It was really just getting different gear. I definitely was a lot more prepared this time around than in 2012.
Right. Yeah.
So I just I recognize that like, nature's in the driver's seat, not you. And so absolutely. You just kind of have to roll with the punches sometimes. So so I had all the right gear, and mostly, there was some like rainy, crappy days. And there was one really, really, really cold, like brutally cold snowstorm and windstorm in Shenandoah National Park. But other than that, I only had a handful of like snowy days or some dreary, rainy days, but it was all pretty manageable.
Nice.
But I was able to, so on my 72nd day, I actually tried to go up South Kinsman. The snow was pretty impassable, came back down, and then got a rental car, drove to Boston Logan, flew back to Kansas City all that same day. So I was hiking on trail at noon, and I was back in Kansas City at midnight.
Wow. And then, so you switched out your gear. You then decided to go to the PCT to get some weather there. So when did you start hiking on the PCT?
So I was on trail on the Appalachian Trail on April 15th. I switched out gear on April 16th, and I was on the PCT hiking on April 17th.
Oh, gosh. That's exhausting, even that, just thinking about that. So how did that go? Because I know that you then had to get off, I think you had to get off for a wedding or something, didn't you?
Right. Yeah. So I went 56 days north from Campo at the border wall to Dunsmuir, California at I-5. Right. And then that was June 11th. Uh-huh. And then I got off June 12th, went back to the Appalachian Trail, went north from Kinsman Notch. And so I was back on the AT on June 13th, and then I finished June 29th.
Did you get a better view of Katahdin?
Yeah, it was an incredible day. It was warm. It was super nice. It was a great money shot.
That's nice. That's great. So then you done Katahdin. Then of course you got to get down again. You got to go somewhere else. Where'd you head to then?
So then I transitioned on June 30th, and then I was back on the PCT on July 1st. So, wow. And then I went I think it was about a week, and then I got COVID, went to a wedding. So I was off trail completely for 7 days, with 2 half days on either end.
Hang on. That's not good. So you got COVID, then you went to a wedding.
Well,
anybody else get COVID?
No, actually it was, the timing couldn't have been better to get COVID. I know that's
if you're going to get it,
really weird thing to say, but like when I got COVID, I got it either in Etna, California, or Sayad Valley. Right. And so when I ended up hiking for a day, not feeling good, and I really started to not feel good. But the quarantine time was 5 days from onset to when quarantine ends.
Right.
And so I had hiked for a day, and then I spent 4 days in quarantine, and there was a wedding that I had to go to, but I was the best man. I really messed this up. And it was a traditional Indian wedding where you're kind of like the court jester. It's like 500 people.
Nice.
And so I'm going to go from like, not only at that point being on trail from the time I'd started hiking to that point, like 167 something days, but I was just coming off of like COVID quarantine. So I ended up feeling fine. Went to the wedding. I was completely asymptomatic at that point. Nobody there got COVID, so I wasn't
That's good news. That's good news.
Like the catalyst of like a super spreader. And then I got back at like 4-ish something. That was, I think, July 17th or so.
And you finished the PCT. I think it's August the 12th. And then you had to head for the CDT. Or had you done any of the? You hadn't done any of the CDT by then, had you?
No. So I did the Appalachian Trail in 2 installments, the PCT in 2 installments, and then I did the then I did the Continental Divide Trail in just one swing.
And when did you actually finish then?
So I started August 16th, and then I finished November 15th.
Wow. So a couple of things about that. Was it worth it?
Totally.
And why? What did you prove to yourself? What you proved you could do it, but what did you prove to yourself about? Were there things you didn't know about yourself? Because it sounds to me like you knew you were a determined guy. Were you trying to prove it to anybody else?
Not really, even. I just knew that I had the capacity to do it. I just, I needed to quit dreaming about it and just do it while I was relatively young, because it's either doing it then or doing it when I retire. And, I
don't recommend that. Recommend that. Right. Yeah. And were you able to segment your feeling about each trail, or did you see it all as one long trail? Because I know I asked Quadzilla this a couple of years ago when he was a guest on the show, and he hadn't really thought about it. You couldn't really celebrate when you got to Katahdin. You couldn't really celebrate when you got to the end of the PCT, or could you? Or did you feel that that's one bit done, or that's just I'm a third of the way through this when you got to Katahdin?
That's a really great question. I actually haven't been asked that before, but I would say a little bit of both. So I knew that the overall task was not finished yet. However, I do pretty well at compartmentalizing goals, so it never becomes overwhelming. So quitting the entire year never crossed my mind. I had fun in some capacity every single day, and I really love doing it every single day, and I really miss it now every single day.
I bet you do, yeah. You will. You just a bit spoiler alert. You will for the rest of your life. So enjoy that.
Yeah.
So was it what you thought it would be like when you finished? There was this big ass goal you had when you climbed down from Katahdin in 2012, and now 10 years later you did it. What did it feel like? Did it feel like you hoped it would be, or was it not enough?
It wasn't enough. It was a really surreal feeling. It was pretty numb. So I guess going back to the question that you just asked about, like how I felt it, if I was able to celebrate like getting to the end of every trail, like getting Katahdin was amazing. Like it was a big celebration. It was a big milestone. Sure. First trail's done. When I finished the PCT, second trail's done. It was awesome. The victory lap back to Hart's Pass, because you couldn't get to Manning Park, was really great, because I got to see some friends from the Sierra that I hadn't seen in a couple months at that point.
Nice, very nice.
And then it's like, okay, 2 in the bag, 1 to go. And then the Continental Divide Trail was almost like an extended, and this is like really, really premature, but it was like an extended finale, like an extended victory lap.
Wow. It's a long old bloody victory lap, isn't it?
And it was just like, but it was weird because the Continental Divide Trail, just mentally, like there were some difficult days with really bad weather in Colorado and New Mexico. But other than that, though, I mean, the Continental Divide Trail definitely felt the fastest of all of them.
It's the longest as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, actually,
in distance, I believe. Oh, of course, it can vary by about 500 miles, can't it?
Yeah, right. So it was almost the length of the PCT. I think it was 50. It ended up being like 52 miles shorter for me than the PCT, but it's still 2,600 miles.
Still a ways.
Yeah. So, Yeah, it was really interesting. At the CDT was almost like everything was so automatic at that point, and you're just kind of on autopilot that I was just trying to like enjoy and soak it up, especially once I got to New Mexico. Man, it was like once I hit that sign that said like a New Mexico license plate, welcome to Carson National Forest, I was like, man, this is state 22 of 22. And it was just a pretty crazy moment. Honestly, I felt more a sense of like elation getting to the Colorado New Mexico state line than probably at the very end, because I thought I would experience more happiness and joy, but it was a real mixed bag of emotions when I got to the Crazy Cook terminus.
Because you know it's over, don't you?
Right. Yeah. And so it's just like, well, like what's next? Like
that of course is my last question. But before I get to my last question, so what did Ali, your wife, see in you that had changed, or were you that person always? Did the trail bring out something in you, or was it the trail a manifestation of what you are?
I think the trail was just a manifestation of what I already was. I think that, and maybe this is too early for me to make a call on that.
Right. Okay.
Because like right now, I've never experienced post-trail blues. I've never experienced like any kind of like post-trail depression or anything like that. I never experienced it on the Appalachian Trail in 2012 or the 14 other thru hikes I've done in the interim. Right. But I definitely experienced not like sustained like depression, but definitely I feel like more heightened anxiety. Now that I'm done, I definitely am, at least currently, and I feel like this is always just a phase, but I'm just like pretty moody these days, just because like, for 286 days, you make your own schedule. You dictate everything. So as much as you want to get done in a day, that's on you. And now like so much of that hinges on like on society and other people. And, I'm just kind of like a go kind of guy. And, it's like, now like some of that hinges on like being patient with others to accomplish something. And it's just like, I really miss kind of doing everything at my own pace and having that full autonomy to just really, really really push my body and really put my mind where I feel like it needs to be that day. And currently I just feel like I'm in a little bit of a box. Funny enough,
and I didn't do anything like you, obviously, but even after my thru-hike, I felt a little bit that way myself. And you actually finished 3 months ago, and I know it took me 3 months to get over it myself. And you're unpacking the experience day by day. Have your thoughts evolved in a good direction or a bad direction? Do you think the way you feel about things is getting better or getting worse?
I don't feel like I can really choose a direction at this point.
Okay.
I feel like, from kind of the post-trail blues that I started to experience about 6 weeks after, I feel like it's definitely going better now.
Right.
But, after my 2012 thru hike, like on Springer Mountain at 9:07 p.m. on November 20th, I stood on top of Springer Mountain facing north, and I flipped off the entire AT. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm never doing this again.
Yep.
Well, just going through Hurricane Sandy was such an experience on my 82nd day. So, 3 feet of snow in Tennessee on October 30th, like the day before Halloween was pretty nuts. So, that was, and and at that point, with like 21 days or so left, I was very ready to be done. And, I was waiting for that moment to happen, and it never, and like some days certainly sucked like in 2022. Like there were some really, really challenging days where I was like,
it would be extraordinary if they didn't suck some days. I mean, really.
Yeah, I've hit my limit. But like in 2012, I felt like I'd hit my physical limit.
Wow.
But this time around, I didn't find that. I thought like certainly I'm going to find that. You know, in averaging over a marathon a day for 286 consecutive days. I'm like I have to get to that limit. And there were certain days that I hit that limit, but overall, as an overall experience, I feel like that remained elusive, and that was really weird and unfulfilling to me that I didn't get to that point.
Well, that speaks to that lack of satisfaction in many ways. You know, it's not
Right.
enough, and I kind of wonder. You're still a young man. You would think you've probably peaked as a hiker. Not that the rest is only downhill, but you can only challenge yourself more by going further. Is that likely in the future, or do you think this is the peak of what you're going to be doing in a hiking year?
I think in terms of mileage, yes. In terms of intensity, no.
Okay. Wow. So I can see Everest in your future then. Oh, God.
Well, actually, Everest is something that has actually never appealed to me.
Oh, good. Your wife would be delighted to hear.
Yeah, right.
Well, look, Charlie, you've got an amazing story and just many congratulations. What an achievement to be able to do this. I too thought about it. I didn't think about doing it, but I thought about it, and I thought these guys must be crazy. But you're now is it 13th person to complete it, or 14th?
Yeah. So as much information as I could find, to the best of my knowledge, I was the 13th person to complete it.
Wow.
And I think that there's now 16 of us that have finished. And it was flying Brian Robinson in 2001 that paved the way for all of us.
Well, that's very nice of you to give that credit out there. That's pretty cool. Well, look, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story with us. And I'm kind of concerned for you what you are going to do next. But if it becomes as epic as this, just let me know and we'll get you back on the show to talk about that as well. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, man. Take it easy. Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks
Bye.
for having me. Bye.
What a guy, eh? Of course, I'd never dream of doing such a thing. But Charlie started thinking about it in 2012 as he was about 10 miles into his first ever thru-hike. It kind of shows you what grit and determination can do for you, doesn't it? I must say, I was even amazed that he's transitioning from trail to home to trail. He must have woken up some mornings with no idea where he was, probably not even knowing which trail he was on. Epic achievement, though. Just before we get to our class of 23, I wanted to give you all a heads up that tonight, March the 2nd at 8 p.m, I'm going to be appearing live on Jester's podcast with what I think is a very exciting announcement to make. If you'd like to listen in, then check your show notes for the link to join us. We're also going to put something on the Hiking Radio Network Facebook page. I hope to see one or two of you this evening. Now, let's hear from two of our class of 23 who are just about to step into the unknown. First up, we've got Mark Carpenter, who will be out there next week as he's just finishing up work. Here's Mark. Well, we're back on with Mark Carpenter, who we met very early on as our Mighty Blue class of 23. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Steve.
And you're probably getting quite excited, I suspect, aren't you? Because you're heading out soon. So tell us when you're leaving and what's the plan?
I'm leaving on February 28th.
Uh-huh.
Then my wife and I are driving down to our friends just north of Atlanta, and we'll stay the day with them March 1st, and then we'll all drive over to Amicalola Falls State Park so I can get started.
Right. Well, I'm actually going there the next day. I'm going there on the Friday for the Appalachian Trail kickoff, and I'm speaking on the Sunday morning, funnily enough.
Wow.
So I'm just about going to miss you, unfortunately. So we spoke for some time, and I know you've been wanting to do this for a long time. I know you first stepped on the trail when you were 13 years old, and you're no longer 13. I know that. So what changes have happened since we spoke before? What have you done to your gear and so on?
Yeah, so we talked about, wanting to get in the gym and exercise. So I was able to do that. I started lifting weights, and I was doing some running and doing some hiking and doing some stretching with yoga.
Right.
I've been busy with that.
Well, hang on. Don't move on from that. So we actually had a guest on a few weeks ago who's been doing yoga regularly, and he says it massively benefited his hiking. So are you learning techniques you might be able to use out on the trail?
Well, I'm pretty much a novice.
Okay.
It's really good stretching, I will say that. And yeah, it's definitely a challenge, especially for me.
You got 6 months to try to become an expert, so you could put plenty of hours in to do that.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling then? Have you lost weight? Or I mean, I don't remember whether you're a big guy or reasonable weight anyway, but you expecting to lose a lot of weight on this trail?
Yeah, I am. Actually, I've been kind of storing up some fat. So
yeah, a lot of us do that. I don't think it's why we do it. We do it because we should have been eating so much. But you're certainly doing the stuff you need. Do you feel ready for it now? I know you've been waiting a long time, but do you actually feel physically ready for it?
I do. I was able to get out and do a mini shakedown, meaning one night.
All right.
I learned quite a bit in that one day.
Tell us. What'd you learn?
Yeah, so I went to this down a place called Shawnee State Park in Ohio, southern Ohio. I learned that they actually call it the Little Smokies. And,
oh, really? Nice.
Yeah. So when I got there, I planned to maybe do 2 or 3 nights. It was February 1st. I was barely above freezing. And,
nice.
yeah, I wanted to get used to the cold.
Yeah.
That's on my gear. So everything was kind of iced over, kind of frozen, and it was very, very steep. So that part was very challenging for me.
Sure.
I had packed my backpack, and I would use an old scale that we had around, and I would typically just stand on the scale and then get off and then get my pack, stand on the scale. Not very, very scientific, and it turned out it was.
It's a horrifying difference, isn't it?
Oh my! So the hike was fine. The first day I did about 6 miles. Because I started fairly late in the day, and I got 6 miles. Got to the campsite. Not many places to sit because it was so cold and very icy. Had my dinner, and then I found myself lying in my tent about 4:30. And I was like, I am going to have trouble sitting here 12, 14 hours.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to work.
You might want to, have you considered taking one of those, I don't know what they're called now, those chairs. I've got a chair, so it's £1. It's £1, and it takes me, I'm a big guy, I'm 255 pounds, and it takes me quite easily and quite comfortably, and I took it with me on my trip to Whitney this year, and it was a blessing to have a chair to sit in. You might want to think about that. I know some people, particularly experienced hikers, say, you can sit on a rock somewhere. Sitting on a rock sucks. Yeah. So try to sit, if you can sit on a chair, sit on a chair.
Okay. I mean, I do have a bear can, and that's what I was going to say.
Right. All right. Okay.
No padding, but still.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the padding bit. Well, some people use one of those fold-up things they use for the base. Instead of having an air pad, some of them have those, I don't even know what they're called, those long things they put underneath their sleeping pad when they sleep in shelters usually. Okay. Yeah, you could get a small one of those just to sit on and put on a rock, and that doubles up as well. That is your thing to sit on every day. Just sit on that wherever you are. But a chair, trust me, it'll change your life. Now, you also in your note to me, you said you've replaced your pack. But right. before you talk about that, what was the weight? How much? When you went on this shakedown, how much was your pack and you together?
Well, I was trying to pack, like, for worst case scenario, packing a lot of food and things. Yeah. Turns out I was hauling 37 pounds when I.
Well, that's all right.
That's okay. Well, it's not what I was looking forward to doing. I wanted to get closer to 25, and so my pack was actually a size large, and
right.
I went and I tried to make all the adjustments I could, and it just did not get comfortable with that weight. And so I got the same type of pack, but I got a medium size. I
don't know whether you heard on one of our shows. I've told people this a couple of times that I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2" and 255 pounds. I just assume I'm always large or extra large. I went to Z-Packs, their office where they actually build the the tents and the packs, and they were excellent. They were so very good. And they fitted me with a pack, and they said straight away, you don't need a large pack, you need a medium.
Yeah.
I felt almost insulted. I've been medium for years. But in terms of pack weight, he said you've got long legs, but your torso is a medium. So you know what, that really worked for me as well. So I'm glad you've made that change.
Yeah.
If you're more comfortable, and do you notice the difference?
I do, and plus, as we talked before, my gear was pretty old, and newer pack, the padding is so much nicer and in the right place.
Yes.
So that made a difference.
Yeah, cool. So any other changes you made or not? Or you're now really dialed in with what you need?
Well, I've been cutting the weight. I think I got it down to like 23 pounds, and I feel good about that. And that's my base weight.
Right.
That includes my winter clothes. And so, yeah, so I should get a little bit lighter down the road. So
tell me, having waited for this for so long, I bet you can't wait now for next week, can you?
No, I can't. So this last week and a half, I've been doing nothing but preparing everything around the house, trying to make sure nothing has to be done, got my taxes done. Then yesterday morning, one of my water lines popped inside the house. And so I was like, I got to get care of right away. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Life doesn't. When you go away, life doesn't stop.
No.
You are putting on your partner, your wife, your kids, whoever's around. You are putting on them some of the things you used to do. I mean, it's an inescapable part of going on a thru hike. So you're lucky you've got the support, because not everybody does have that support when they go out there. So look, I wish you absolutely the best luck in the world. I'm rooting for you, obviously. And when you get out there, starting on March the 2nd next Thursday, just send us a picture of you at Springer so we can know you've started. You've also you said you're initiating a Facebook group page. Is that just for family and friends, or do you want to share that link or not?
Right now, I was going to do it with family and friends. Yeah. Okay,
fine. No worries at all. Okay, so best of luck. Hope it goes well, and just enjoy it and don't rush. Take your time, take it easy, and you'll enjoy it that much more, okay?
Oh, yes, will do. Thank you.
Okay, buddy, take it easy.
Okay.
Man, this is such an exciting time. In fact, as we've got a couple of older guys on the show this week, I wonder if the sense of urgency to get out there isn't stronger for them than it is for younger people. I mean, they've got all the time in the world, haven't they, younger people? But we haven't. After all, this has often been a lifelong dream, and it's about to happen for them. We'll check back in with Mark once he's been out there for a month or so. So now, let's move on to Carl, our next Mighty Blue class member. Carl is, if you're listening to this on Thursday morning, March the 2nd, probably just heading out under the arches at Amicalola. Yep, it's his first day on trail. Here's Carl. So we're back on, and even though I think we played the recording quite recently, this is Carl Bergquist. Hey, Carl, how are you?
I'm fine, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. And we delayed doing it because you hadn't actually quite left work yet. And you're apparently now sort of left work, and you're getting ready to go. So what's the plan right now then? When are you actually leaving?
Yep. So my last day of work was last Friday. This is a Monday. So technically running out my vacation through March 10th, but I'm leaving March 14th to fly to Atlanta.
All right.
And I will go to Amicalola Falls and do the approach trail. Uh-huh. Although I've been having second thoughts about that every time I hear somebody says it doesn't count anyway, and I look at the
you know what, it doesn't
50 steps.
it doesn't, but I've done it both ways. I've done the approach trail and I've done up the back from the car park or whatever, the parking lot. The approach trail's better. I mean, it's 8 miles of it's a day extra effectively, but you know what, you'll get to the top, you'll meet other people who've just started that day. Why not? Just do the approach trail and enjoy it. If you start in the morning, sometime about 8 or 9 o'clock, you'll be there by lunchtime. Just hang out up there, just relax and try to enjoy the day. And you've actually got a trail name already, apparently. So talk to us about that.
So much discussion with various peoples and colleagues at work as well, and But my niece prevailed. I should say my 30-something-year-old niece. But my enjoyment, if you will, of craft brewing and IPAs, she suggested the name hops
Nice.
on the AT. So that's what it is, and I'm going to try to post an occasional picture and a few words or events on Instagram under that handle, if you will. And as soon as my daughters show me how to do it properly, so I'm not trying to figure it out in the woods. But
yeah, that whole thing. Yeah, it's funny actually. I didn't notice it in 2014, probably because they weren't there. There's loads and loads of these craft breweries up the trail. You can have a pub crawl for about 500 or 600 miles of it. So enjoy that. I'm sure you will.
I don't know that I've described that element of it to my wife yet, so I'll probably have to work that into the conversation soon.
Yeah. So we actually, even though you were on the show quite recently, we actually spoke quite a while ago. Have you been doing any, how you been preparing for this? I think we recorded sometime in early December. So what have you been doing since?
So, as I said, I've been working. So when I was working away from home, I was living up in the city of Toronto.
Sure.
So I would do what I called my city hikes, and I would try to hike. I would walk at least 5 miles every day.
Nice.
And I generally on the weekends would hike in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 miles. Not quite the hills that I will encounter.
Not quite,
but definitely the cold. I won't have any problem with the cold. So.
Oh yeah. You never know. It does surprise you sometimes. And what did your colleagues think of your little adventure you've taken on?
They were surprised. Many of them thought it was just a wonderful thought, and they were amazed. They say most people go to, when they retire, what are they going to do? They're going to sit around. They don't have any plans. And you've got literally, 6 days from your retirement date to when you're going to be on the trail.
That's right.
And so I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think they were kind of impressed with the fact that I had this definite thing I wanted to do and to accomplish.
Sure.
And by the same token, they weren't as surprised just having known me. So
there you go. And you finished your message to me the other day, which made me smile, actually. You said you're excited and anxious at this point. I totally get the excitement. What's the main anxiety?
Well, it's a big undertaking, so there's a certain amount of anxiousness of whether or not I can do it. I really want to be successful to do it. But I know it's a challenge. I know whatever it is, 20-25% of the people who try to do it, only 20-25% succeed. And I've heard you say many times on the show, it's 5 million steps, and it only takes one bad step before your trail days can be done. So I'm aware of that. So it's just that hesitancy, that concern about, am I going to do everything right? And I know I won't.
But Carl, you can't do anything about that.
No.
Ultimately, all you can do is do step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. And when you count up to 5 million, you'll be there. If you can't do it or something happens to you, then that's fine. There's absolutely no point worrying about it now. I think the only thing that, I'm looking back now thinking when I went, I wasn't worried second time, but first time, I was worried about everything, literally everything I faced. But just try to embrace the situation and don't get too worried about it, because it is still, and it's an enormous undertaking, and accept that it is. And I think you've already accepted that, and you're prepared for it. Now, whether you're sufficiently prepared, you're going to find out. But even if you are the most prepared person in the world, as I say, one step could screw you up. It's the way it goes. There's nothing you can do about that. So there's no point in worrying about it, as far as I can see. And what about your gear? Have you made any changes to gear since we were talking, or are you still sort of tweaking and so on?
I'm pretty set on the basic gear. I'm using the Gossamer gear, the One, which is a really lightweight one-person tent. It's about 17 ounces, with my trekking poles as the tent stakes.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. I thought it was really easy to use, and I'm constantly amazed at the improvements in gear from when I really did any serious hiking years ago. So, I mean, the whole I've packed and unpacked my pack several times. I'm about with about 5 days of food and 2 liters of water. I'm just around 26 pounds.
That's really good. You know what? You don't need 2 liters of water. I've just been speaking to somebody else literally just before I spoke to you. He's been out there. He's done 109 miles so far on the trail, and he's heading back out again. He's come home for a second time now to sort something out, which was always in the plan. And he said there is so much water out there. He's cutting down the amount of water he's taking. I mean, that'll change as the year goes on.
Right.
But carrying more than a litre, I think is unnecessary. But if that's what makes you comfortable, then that's what you should do.
Oh, I have a bad habit of exercising, of not hydrating enough.
Yeah.
And in cooler weather, especially, because you're not sweating it out, you don't feel the need, and then all of a sudden,
make sure you drink your liter.
well, but my point is, so I think, no matter, so I hear you. I will, let me say it this way. I will be able to carry, I'm going to have 2 1-liter bottles. One of them might not always be full.
Right.
So
okay.
I depending on the day and the weather and everything else. So I plan on that. That's just sort of the workings of my mind of what I need to be prepared to do. And I'm not really worried about the cold. I'm generally a person who the cold doesn't bother too much. I always joke that it's my Scandinavian blood. So I'm not real concerned about that given the year, but I know I can't control that. I know we could get the way the weather's been across the country this year, we could get a foot of snow in April.
Absolutely, yeah. And you don't want that. I had snow in April, by the way, when I went. So I wouldn't. One guarantee is you'll have no idea what the weather's going to be. So just embrace it and enjoy it. Look, I wish you well as always, and you'll be going middle of March. So perhaps we'll catch up with you at the beginning or partway through April and see how you're getting on. Okay.
All right, sounds great. Thanks a lot,
man.
Steve.
Take it easy then. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
So he's on his way. Magic moment, let me tell you. I don't care how confident you are, particularly as a man of a certain age. It's kind of humbling to be out there in those early days, thinking that everybody else thinks you're screwing up. While in reality, they're all just trying to keep it together themselves. Great times. Now, before we get on to Dr. Lynn, I wanted to remind you that I'm speaking at the AT Kickoff this Sunday, March the 5th at Amicalola. I'm driving up there tomorrow to camp in the tent city Friday night, hanging about and chatting with people on Saturday and listening to the other presenters. Then I'll be staying at the lodge Saturday night before giving my presentation on Sunday morning at 10:30. I hope some of you can make it. Now, let's hear how to deal with blisters on the trail. Here's Dr. Lynn. Well, we're back on with Dr. Lynn. Hey, Lynn, how are you?
Doing well today, thanks.
Good. And unbeknownst to the listeners, but they're now going to know, we're going to actually do 2 recordings today. So let's start with blisters, which was the one you first sent me. And one of the things that struck me straight away was this remarkable fact. Well, you tell us what it actually says, and I wonder why it would be this way.
So when I was doing my research on blisters, I came across an interesting statistic. I don't remember honestly where I saw the quote, but it says, a review of the medical risks of hiking the AT reported that foot blisters affect 64% of all hikers. During a 12-month period of Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, the incidence of foot blisters was 33%.
That's quite a difference, isn't it? And as somebody who didn't have a single blister on both of my AT hikes, I was obviously one of the 36%, not the 64% who got the blisters. What do you think would? And I'm just saying off the top of my head, I don't know the answer. But do you think it might well be just people don't wear their boots in enough? Because obviously army guys wear their boots in.
I'm not sure if it's wearing your boots in enough versus having the proper fitting footwear. I know myself personally, I never had to actually break in my hiking boots other than the ones that I had when I was a teenager. And my dad and I did a weekend on the Appalachian Trail. We actually had to stop early because we had so many blisters. But I'm not, dropping names or anything. I wear Merrell Moabs. I can take them out of the box and go for a long hike and never have an issue because they fit me really well. And that's a big issue with people and blisters. You have to have footwear that fits you very well. I mean, I can wear regular shoes, and sometimes if they don't fit well, I'll get a blister. But if they fit well... It's funny though, isn't it? Certain shoes become terribly popular. I'm sure they're great shoes, but they may just be great shoes for the person who's talking about them on YouTube or something. If they work for you, then do it. But that's
right.
That's a big deal, is having proper fitting footwear and proper protection. So
how do they occur then? I mean, having done the AT twice, I've done about 4,500 miles on the AT, nearly 4,500 miles on the AT. And it didn't, whatever it was, didn't happen to me at all. I didn't saw no redness, no rubbing or anything like that. What is it that actually makes a blister start to appear?
It's the excessive friction between two areas on your skin. You can actually get a blister just by rubbing two fingers together hard enough, or your toes rubbing together. It doesn't have to be a toe rubbing against a shoe or a sock, or sometimes people will get blisters on their hands if they're holding their hiking poles and they get a lot of friction. So it's the excessive amount of friction that causes the blister. It causes the top layer of the skin to actually separate from the layer underneath. And when that happens, there's a little bit of fluid that occurs in between the two layers. That's that fluid that you see when a blister arises.
Well, I wore the Injinji toe socks. It's just no ad for Injinji because they don't pay me anything to say it. But I wore the Injinji toe socks underneath some darn tufts. And that seemed to work for me because I presume that meant the bits where I would normally expect to get blisters between the toes were never actually rubbing against each other than through the sock. Would that be right?
It is right, absolutely. I wear regular sock liners, not the ones with the individual toes, underneath or inside my darn tufts. And that also has not caused me any trouble.
Sure. And you say that if you treat the area when you feel the warning signs, and the warning signs are just the redness, or you just feel a bit of a heat on your toes, because I have had blisters in the past, but not the AT for some reason.
Yeah. So the warning signs are redness, which you would have to actually see, and most people have hiking boots and socks and liners, so they won't see that. But if you feel an irritation, almost feel like there's a piece of sand stuck on your heel or on your pinky toe, or something that you feel is rubbing, you really should stop right away. Take your shoes and socks off, take a look, examine, is there a piece of grit or something that's causing this damage, or is this a hot spot that's starting? And if you think that it's a hot spot, you need to take action in order to prevent the blister from happening.
And what sort of action do you take? What do you personally put on them if you get them?
So for me, I like to use a certain product called Skin Prep, which I think we talked about in our first aid kit session. Right. Looks like it's a piece of an alcohol wipe, but it's impregnated with a certain type of a barrier film that you can wipe onto your hot spot, and it creates almost like an invisible next layer of skin, and it really reduces friction very well. A lot of people like to use leukotape or moleskin.
Yeah. Is that stuff you're talking about? Because when I did get blisters, which was terrible, by the way, I was wearing sandals and I was hiking the Camino, and my niece, when I took my shoe off once, said I had more blister than foot, which was awful. And I put some stuff. I put some stuff called Compeed on. It was like a Band-Aid, but there was a jelly sort of stuff there. Is that the same sort of stuff you're thinking of, or do you think that would be the same sort of thing?
It's not the same sort of thing. What you were using was appropriate for after you got a blister. So the skin prep is to help prevent the blister from happening. It really won't help you once you've gotten the blister.
Right. And what about the difference between smaller blisters and larger blisters?
So when you get a small blister, anything about 1/4 of an inch or less, you can leave it alone. You don't need to pop it or anything like that, but you do need to add some protection over that area, such as leukotape or a bandage.
And that will be likely to stop it developing further?
Correct.
Right.
You also should try to adjust your shoes, your socks. Sometimes it's just simple realigning where your sock seam is. Sometimes that can be an issue.
Sure.
If you have a larger blister, it should be drained, but you should leave the skin intact. So what do I mean by that? You should clean the area with either an alcohol pad or some hand sanitizer or soap and water, and then take a clean needle. Those safety pins that we talked about in the first aid kit, you can clean them same way you clean the blister, with an alcohol pad or hand sanitizer, and then just gently puncture a hole in the top of the blister and allow the fluid to drain out, but leave the skin there. You're going to be so tempted to peel off that skin, but that skin now is actually an extra layer of protection for the skin that's underlying it, which is now going to be raw, and you don't want that skin to be irritated anymore, because then that could develop into bleeding blisters and skin infection, and that could really sideline your hike. And
you suggest petroleum jelly or antibiotic ointment rather, and then some gauze?
Yeah, a little gauze or a Band-Aid or a moleskin, depends on the size of the blister. Again, what you're trying to do is help protect and add more padding to that area so that it doesn't continue to get the friction from whatever source was causing the initial blister.
Sure. And just to finish this off, you talk about keeping your feet as dry as possible. I know that whenever I came to not whenever, but quite often when I came to a stop, especially by a stream, not where people were getting water, by the way, I would just take my shoes and socks off and for having a rest, and try to dip my feet in the water just to cool them down and then dry them off. And that felt so good for my feet. I never really had any problems, with them like that. But then you say something I never did once. You said, wash your feet every evening with soap and water and dry them well. And that will help because what? It's going to remove stuff that may be there?
Yes. First of all, I just want to go back to you dipping your feet in the water. Oftentimes that water is nice and cold. Yep. So one of the things is it will help you, your feet feel better. But it will also help with any swelling that you've had in your feet. You've been walking now probably for a good 4, 5, 6 hours, and your feet are swollen. Your feet are larger, there's going to be less room in your shoes and socks, so there's going to be more likelihood that you could get a friction. So if you are able to rest your feet and allow them to cool down in water, that helps with reducing swelling. Very important.
Before you go on to the next bit about washing your feet every evening, I actually grew a foot size when I was on the AT first time. I started as a size 13 and I finished as a size 14. And actually, when I was getting my boots in the very first time, was to get a size not bigger than my normal shoes. I got size 14s and I grew into them because after that I had to have shoes that were size 14 as well. So the swelling of your feet, I entirely recognise it. Definitely happened to mine, and they stayed there as well. They never fully went down. But anyway,
yeah,
you can...
yeah. That happened to me when I was hiking in New Jersey. I had shoes that wound up being too small. And again, I almost had an issue, but the skin prepped helped. But I could see that my feet were just very swollen. And then I got a new pair of shoes. I got them actually a size and a half larger.
Wow.
Because I was using thicker socks. I was using the sock liners. And I just wanted my toes to have plenty of room to be able to wiggle and to reduce my risk of friction.
Sure. So the other thing, I interrupted you. You talked about, you said you wanted to talk about washing your feet every evening, which I didn't do. Yeah, so talk
washing
about
the
that.
feet every evening with soap and water. First of all, it just feels so good to be able to do that. And you have little microscopic areas of bacteria and grit that are in your feet. If you ever do get a blister and you have a lot of bacteria or grit, that can increase your risk for an actual infection. Blisters by themselves are not infectious or infected. But if they are then exposed to a significant amount of bacteria, they can develop an infection, and that could be very dangerous.
Okay, well, good to know. I'm sure if 64% of people hiking the AT this year get some blisters, then they need to listen to this. Okay, but thanks for that. And even though we're now going to stop the recording here now, we're now going to talk about wounds. So I'll feel like I'll see you next week, but literally in 10 seconds, I'll be speaking to you again. Thanks. Bye. And as often happens, when I pressed stop, Lynn reminded me she had an answer to a question one of our listeners gave her. His name's Dave Collins, and here's Lynn's answer. I did actually have a question from a listener called Dave Collins, and Dave asked a question. And he actually asked about, could blisters be a topic for Lynn all by herself? Well, we've just done the blister topic. I forgot to ask Lynn the question. But the question comes specifically as this. His question said, my question comes from reviewing her first aid kit list. On it, she lists skin barrier film wipes to help reduce friction and prevent blisters. My question is, how does one use them? Do you swab the blister first, then apply Leukotape? Just the wipes alone? And could benzoin compound tincture do the same thing? Online, I see that both the skin barrier wipes and benzoin tincture will help tape stick to the skin. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and right. Okay. I can definitely answer that. So the skin protective wipes are used before you get a blister. You can put the skin barrier wipes on in the morning when you're getting ready. And the way you use them is if you've got them in the little packets that, as I said, look like a little alcohol pad, you open the packet, you take the wipe out, and you gently rub it around the area that you are most likely to get a blister. It will feel a little sticky, but it will air dry in a couple of minutes, and then you won't feel any stickiness at all. What Dave was mentioning regarding it helping tape to adhere, yes, this is a compound that is used for people who need to stick tape and other types of medical devices onto their skin, like, for instance, people who have glucose meters that they stick on the skin. You put this skin prep on first, and then you put the adhesive for the glucose meter on, and it helps to allow the adhesive to stick. But this is something that's going to stick to your skin for like 10 days. You want a really nice adhesive area. It can help Leukotape stick better to the skin. The problem is that it's going to be harder for the Leukotape to be taken off the skin if you're actually using the skin prep.
Take off a layer of your skin.
Yeah, it might. So my personal recommendation is you use either the skin prep or the Leukotape, but don't use both because you're going to have a really tough time. Now, the tincture of benzoin he talked about is something that I haven't used in a long time. We used to use this with Steri-Strips before Steri-Strips had their own little adhesive. We used to put that on, and then we used to use these little Steri-Strips. But now the Steri-Strips have their own little adhesive. So I don't know if tincture of benzoin is going to do the same thing as skin barrier film wipes. So I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
There's the right answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for that question, Dave. Appreciate it. And thanks, Lynn, for answering. So there you go, Dave. I hope that worked for you. She's so good, isn't she? She loves doing this. She loves the reading up and putting easy to understand notes together. Remember, you can always download any of the items Lynn has talked about in this series by clicking on a link in the show notes to gain access for free. And of course, all our podcasts are free, but some of you generously support us and keep us going by defraying our expenses. Thanks go this week to our monthly donors, Jessica Diaz, Hugh Ickerath, Justin Mullins, Kevin Eastman, Ann Dobson and Mike Ticello, while Philip Hall also sent us a generous donation this week. And the end of the month is always a bit fraught here when I see a couple of $100 go out of the account, so I thank each and every one of you who supports our shows by donating. You can help too by going to the Hiking Radio Network website and making a donation there. Cheers to one and all. Now, George Stephanos uses every trick in the book to make his shoes last until Delaware Water Gap. Spoiler alert, he fails. I'll see you next week. Monday the 25th of July 1983, mile 1238.7. I got out on the Appalachian Trail at 7:30 this morning. Nothing to write home about, though in a way I'm doing so right now, but a much earlier start than I had managed the past couple of days. The first mile concluded the long descent into Lehigh Gap, which I'd begun yesterday. Hiking through the gap was not your basic untouched wilderness experience. The AT crossed the murky Lehigh River on a highway bridge in the middle of a sombre area graced by a large smoking factory, a used car lot and a number of decaying houses. There was, however, one small glimmer of beauty amidst all the squalor. Coming down the last slope, I caught a glimpse of the happy red and white glow of a flirtatious little Coke machine. She seemed to be cooing, "Come on, sailor, drop that heavy backpack for a moment. Let me cool you down." I was a pushover for her charms. It was a very warm morning with the promise of intense heat for the afternoon. The ensuing trail was one of the most intriguing portions of the entire Appalachian Trail. It climbed out of the gap over a huge rock slide. There were several tough scrambles that probably did not belong on a backpacking trail, but the area possessed a certain unique charm. For the next mile and a half, the AT climbed through a surreal, wasted landscape of naked rock, gigantic boulders covered with chunks of blasted rubble. Occasional black, broken skeletons of dead trees groped upward through the barren mass. There were continuous panoramic views into the smoky industrial valley below. It was not what you could call beautiful, but it was a fascinating change of pace along the long, wooded crest of Blue Mountain. Most of the 5 miles of trail from Lehigh Gap to Little Gap passed through similar scenery. The ridge crest was a jumble of small rocks, piles of boulders, dead trees and scrubby blackened growth. The entire area resembled the aftermath of a mammoth bombing run. There were a few patches of ripe blueberries and blackberries, but nothing as extensive as those encountered yesterday, so I was able to maintain a decent pace. The 11 miles between Little Gap and the Leroy A. Smith shelter were not nearly as interesting. The rocks were fairly tame for Blue Mountain, but they were a constant presence, taking a further toll on my already badly damaged feet. There was nothing resembling a view. The entire stretch was like one of those dragging, boring ridge walks in central Virginia, only much rockier. It was the wall with teeth. A couple of miles before the shelter, I had another strange experience. I passed a southbound hiker wearing a suit and leather dress shoes, a hat pulled down low over his eyes. He kept his gaze pointed straight down at his feet as we passed, as if he was carefully preventing me from seeing his face. Just to see if he was for real, I said hello. He didn't even glance up. He was either one very strange dude or simply somebody who could not afford to be recognised. I'd come almost 17 miles when I arrived at the Leroy A. Smith shelter at 4:20. That was where I had planned to spend the night. It was a fine shelter, especially for Pennsylvania, but I was just too restless to stay. The weather had again turned tropical today, and I was hurting. I did not wish to turn tomorrow into another death march raised against time by leaving myself with 19 miles to hike by 5 o'clock in order to make the post office in Delaware Water Gap. I rested an hour and then pushed my bruised and blooded feet another 4 miles to Wind Gap. Once I knew for sure I was going to make it, I felt chipper enough to make up a little song about what a terrific guy I was. I sang it while I hiked the last half mile to take my mind off my feet. The song was repulsive, arrogant, and had no redeeming values whatsoever, so I will not burden you with it here. I walked into the Gateway Motel in Wind Gap at 7:15, having hiked 21 miles on only 3 pints of water. For $20, I obtained a room for tonight with air conditioning and a television. The owner even threw in a free ride to the McDonald's located 2 miles away in Wind Gap Village. That policy was a smart move on his part, as hikers will advertise in the registers the businesses that treat us right. Little extras such as saving a backpacker a 4-mile round-trip walk to dinner means a lot after a long, hard day on the trail. Less than 15 miles of Blue Mountain now remain. I should hit Delaware Water Gap relatively early tomorrow, although no doubt I will get my usual lousy late start from a motel or hotel room tomorrow morning. If there's a cobbler in Delaware Water Gap or Stroudsburg, a larger town located 5 miles from the village, I will lay over an extra day and have the sole of my left hiking boot repaired. I've used up almost all the twine which Helen gave me for temporary repairs. The rocks have been chewing it up rapidly. If I cannot find a cobbler, I may just have to buy some more string and make a sprint for Connecticut. Tuesday the 26th of July 1983, mile 1253.5, Delaware Water Gap. I'm writing this entry across the street from my motel in Delaware Water Gap, inside a restaurant featuring the first all-you-can-eat potato bar I have ever seen. It is 9:00 p.m. I arrived in Delaware Water Gap at 4:30 this afternoon. I hit the post office and staggered across the street with my supplies to check out the local hostel. It was a small hostel, but nice, the finished basement of a local church. It was packed with hikers, some of whom had been there for several days. I didn't relish the thought of spending 2 nights crammed in with so many people, so I walked across the street to a restaurant for directions to the nearest motel. For $15, I obtained a small cabin at the Delaware Water Gap Motor Inn, with a large bathroom of my very own and a small porch complete with patio lounge chairs. The final battle of the mileage machine and Blue Mountain began this morning at 8:15. The rocks today were the worst I had yet seen. I probably encountered no more than 2.5 miles of decent footway all day, and virtually all of that was along gravel roads. Over the course of the past few days, I've been barely able to hobble around the shelters at night on my smashed-up feet. The initial 5 or 10 minutes of hiking each morning has been a continuing adventure in pain. After that, my feet would become desensitized from all the pounding, and the pain would fade to very bearable dull ache for the remainder of the day. Except, of course, for those occasions when I stubbed one of my toes on another rock for the 20th time in the past few days. The initial climb out of Wind Gap was tough but short. Less than a mile out on the trail, my last piece of twine broke, occasioning much flopping around of my left hiking boot's sole and some coarse language from my usually civilized mouth. Hey, this is my story, okay? I attempted to tie the boot up with a small piece of plastic-coated cord I'd found lying on the trail, but the knot refused to stay tight. The cord slipped off my boot 5 times in less than 5 minutes, leading to more uncharacteristic vulgarity on my part. And I can tell it any way I want. I finally had a brainstorm. I cut off a short piece from the small coil of rope I carry in my backpack and bound up my shoe with that. This worked okay. It was bulky and awkward to walk on, but it only slipped off from my shoe 3 or 4 times over the course of the remainder of the day's hike. With all the rocks along the trail, I may just have uttered 1 or 2 more mild oaths as I walked along, although, God knows, it's not like me to use foul language. During today's hike, the sole of my right boot began peeling, creating a nice rhythmic cadence with my left sole. It sounded like I was hiking in flip-flops. I need to find a cobbler. My frequent early stops to attend to the boot slowed me down considerably, but I made decent time once the more serious problem was straightened out. When I reached the Kirkbridge shelter at 12:45, I polished off another 8.5 miles of Pennsylvania. 6 miles to go. I rewarded myself for this effort with a half-hour lunch break. As was the case yesterday, today's trail was bone dry, but I was able to tank up on fluids from a water pump at a private retreat about 5 minutes from the shelter on a side trail. I drank all the water I could, well over a quart, and put about a cup in my canteen for the trail ahead. That was more water than I would need for a 6-mile hike, after having just saturated my tissues, but sometimes you just have to live a little. The next 2 miles or so of trail was one unbroken rock pile. Using mind-control techniques which will be described in my next book, The Principles of Psychotic Backpacking, I convinced myself that Blue Mountain was throwing everything it had into one final vain attempt to destroy me, and just kept plugging away, ignoring the beating my feet were taking. Mercifully, I arrived at a gravel road which the Appalachian Trail followed for the ensuing mile and a half to the top of Mount Minzy. I took a 10-minute break at the summit, drinking the last of my water, and began the long descent to the Delaware River. Somewhere during this final downhill, it occurred to me that the first ridge I will be hiking in New Jersey was actually a continuation of Blue Mountain. They were segments of one continuous ridge separated by a gap carved by the Delaware River, hence the name Delaware Water Gap. Duh. I would by no means be finished with Blue Mountain's rocks once I crossed into New Jersey. I filed this cheerful thought away for later and continued down. The trail was steep and rocky in stretches, but the most spectacular scenery since Shenandoah helped. The trail skirted a series of high cliffs overlooking the deep cleft cut through the Kittatinny Mountains by the broad Delaware River. A few miles below Interstate 80 and Stroudsburg's minor urban sprawl, the wild wooded gorge could have been in another universe. The trail slanted northward, descending across the Pennsylvania face of the gorge. A dense cloud of Blue Mountain's most persistent fauna swarmed, escorting me off the mountain, leaving greasy smears of my own blood on my arms and legs as I killed them. These seemed to complement the patchwork of thorn scars, so I left them. My long battle with Blue Mountain was a bloody one, but victory was near. At 4:15 p.m. EDT, I stepped off the footpath onto a gravel road. I soon hit a paved road. Crowds of cheering villagers lined the streets to hail my arrival. Well, maybe not. Across the river, New Jersey awaited with a new series of challenges. But first, a rest and a shoe repair.